Hello, welcome to ITEXPS YouTube video series. Today we are going to talk about Maven tutorial. What is Maven? Maven tutorial provides basic and advanced concepts of Apache Maven technology. Our Maven tutorial is developed for beginners and professionals. Maven is a powerful project management tool that is based on POM project object model. It is used for projects build, dependency and documentation. It simplifies the build process like ANT. But it is too much advanced than ANT. Understanding the problem without Maven. There are many problems that we face during the project development. They are discussed below. 1. Adding set of jars in each project. In case of struts, Spring, Hibernate frameworks, we need to add set of jar files in each project. It must include all the dependencies of jars also. 2. Creating the right project structure. We must create the right project structure in servlet, struts etc. Otherwise it will not be executed. 3. Building and deploying the project. We must have to build and deploy the project so that it may work. What it does. Maven simplifies the above-mentioned problems. It does mainly following tasks. It makes a project easy to build. It provides uniform build process. Maven project can be shared by all the Maven projects. It provides project information log document, cross-referenced sources, mailing list, dependency list, unit test reports etc. It is easy to migrate for new features of Maven. Apache Maven helps to manage builds, documentation, reporting, SCMs, releases, distribution. What is build tool? A build tool takes care of everything for building a process. It does following. Generates source code if auto-generated code is used. Generates documentation from source code. Compiles source code. Packages compiled code into jar of zip file. Installs the packaged code in local repository, server repository, or central repository. Installing Maven. To install Maven on your own system computer, go to the Maven download page and follow the instructions there. In summary, what you need to do is Maven overview core concepts. Maven is centered around the concept of POM Files project object model. A POM file is an XML representation of project resources like source code, test code, dependencies, external jars used etc. The POM contains references to all of these resources. The POM file should be located in the root directory of the project it belongs to. These concepts are explained briefly below to give you an overview, and then in more detail in their own sections later in this tutorial. POM files. When you execute a Maven command, you give Maven a POM file to execute the commands on. Maven will then execute the command on the resources described in the POM. Build life cycles, phases, and goals. The build process in Maven is split up into build life cycles, phases and goals. A build life cycle consists of a sequence of build phases, and each build phase consists of a sequence of goals. When you run Maven, you pass a command to Maven. This command is the name of a build life cycle, phase or goal. If a life cycle is requested executed, all build phases in that life cycle are executed. If a build phase is requested executed, all build phases before it in the predefined sequence of build phases are executed too. Dependencies and repositories. One of the first goals Maven executes is to check the dependencies needed by your project. Dependencies are external jar files, Java libraries that your project uses. If the dependencies are not found in the local Maven repository, Maven downloads them from a central Maven repository and puts them in your local repository. The local repository is just a directory on your computer's hard disk. Build plugins. Build plugins are used to insert extra goals into a build phase. If you need to perform a set of actions for your project which are not covered by the standard Maven build phases and goals, you can add a plugin to the POM file. Maven has some standard plugins you can use, and you can also implement your own in Java if you need to. Build profiles. Build profiles are used if you need to build your project in different ways. For instance, you may need to build your project for your local computer, for development and test. And you may need to build it for deployment on your production environment. These two builds may be different. Maven versus Ant. Ant is another popular build tool by Apache. If you are used to Ant and you are trying to learn Maven, you will notice a difference in the approach of the two projects. Ant uses an imperative approach, meaning you specify in the Ant build file what actions Ant should take. You can specify low-level actions like copying files, compiling code, etc. You specify the actions, and you also specify the sequence in which they are carried out. And has no default directory layout. Maven uses a more declarative approach, meaning that you specify in the Maven POM file what to build, but not how to build it. The POM file describes your project resources, not how to build it. Contrarily, an ANT file describes how to build your project. In Maven, how to build your project is predefined in the Maven build life cycles, phases, and goals. Maven POM Files. A Maven POM file project object model is an XML file that describes the resources of the project. This includes the directories where the source code, test source, etc. is located in, what external dependencies jar files your project has, etc. The POM file describes what to build, but most often not how to build it. How to build it is up to the Maven build phases and goals. You can insert custom actions goals into the Maven build phase if you need to, though. Each project has a POM file. The POM file is named pom.xml and should be located in the root directory of your project. A project divided into subprojects will typically have one POM file for the parent project, and one POM file for each subproject. This structure allows both the total project to be built in one step, or any of the subprojects to be built separately. Throughout the rest of this section I will describe the most important parts of the POM file. For a full reference of the POM file, see the Maven POM reference. The model version element sets what version of the POM model you are using. Use the one matching the Maven version you are using. Version 4.0.0 matches Maven version 2 and 3. The group IT element is a unique ID for an organization, or a project, an open source project, for instance. Most often you will use a group ID which is similar to the root Java package name of the project. For instance, for my Java web crawler project I may choose the group ID com.gencov. The group ID does not have to be a Java package name, and does not need to use the notation for separating words in the ID. But, if you do, the project will be located in the Maven repository under a directory structure matching the group ID. Each is replaced with a directory separator, and each word thus represents a directory. The artifacted element contains the name of the project you are building. In the case of my Java web crawler project, the artifact ID would be Java web crawler. Super POM. All Maven POM files inherit from a super POM. If no super POM is specified, the POM file inherits from the base POM. Here is a diagram illustrating this. You can make a POM file explicitly inherit from another POM file. That way you can change the settings across all inheriting POMs via their common super POM. You specify the super POM at the top of a POM file like this. An inheriting POM file may override settings from a super POM. Just specify new settings in the inheriting POM file. POM inheritance is also covered in more detail in the Maven POM reference. Effective POM. With all this POM inheritance, it may be hard to know what the total POM file looks like when Maven executes. The total POM file result of all inheritance is called the effective POM. You can get Maven to show you the effective POM using this command. This command will make Maven write out the effective POM to the command line prompt. Maven settings file. Maven has two settings files. In the settings files you can configure settings for Maven across all Maven POM files. For instance, you can configure location of local repository, active build profile, etc. Both files are optional. If both files are present, the values in the user home settings file overrides the values in the Maven installation settings file. You can read more about the Maven settings files in the Maven settings reference. Running Maven. When you have installed Maven and have created a POM file and put the POM file in the root directory of your project, you can run Maven on your project. Running Maven is done by executing the mvn command from a command prompt. When executing the mvn command you pass the name of a build lifecycle, phase or goal to it, which Maven then executes. Here is an example. This command executes the build phase called install part of the default build lifecycle, which builds the project and copies the package jar file into the local Maven repository. Actually, this command executes all build phases before install in the build phase sequence, before executing the install build phase. You can execute multiple build life cycles or phases by passing more than one argument to the mvn command. Here is an example. This command first executes the clean build life cycle, which removes compiled classes from the Maven output directory, and then it executes the install build phase. You can also execute a Maven goal, a subpart of a build phase, by passing the build phase and goal name concatenated with a in between as parameter to the Maven command. Here is an example. Maven directory structure. Maven has a standard directory structure. If you follow that directory structure for your project, you do not need to specify the directories of your source code, test code, etc. in your POM file. The src directory is the root directory of your source code and test code. The main directory is the root directory for source code related to the application itself, not test code. The test directory contains the test source code. The Java directories under main and test contains the Java code for the application itself under main and the Java code for the tests under test. The resources directory contains other resources needed by your project. This could be property files used for internationalization of an application, or something else. The web app directory contains your Java web application, if your project is a web application. The web app directory will then be the root directory of the web application. Thus the web app directory contains the web inf directory, etc. The target directory is created by Maven. It contains all the compiled classes, jar files, etc. produced by Maven. When executing the clean build phase, it is the target directory which is cleaned. Project dependencies. Unless your project is small, your project may need external Java APIs or frameworks which are packaged in their own jar files. These jar files are needed on the class path when you compile your project code. Keeping your project up to date with the correct versions of these external jar files can be a comprehensive task. Each external jar may again also need other external jar files, etc. Downloading all these external dependencies jar files recursively and making sure that the right versions are downloaded is cumbersome. Especially when your project grows big, and you get more and more external dependencies. Luckily, Maven has built-in dependency management. You specify in the POM file what external libraries your project depends on, and which version, and then Maven downloads them for you and puts them in your local Maven repository. If any of these external libraries need other libraries, then these other libraries are also downloaded into your local Maven repository. Notice the dependencies element in bold. Inside it are two dependency elements. Each dependency element describes an external dependency. External dependencies. An external dependency in Maven is a dependency jar file which is not located in a Maven repository, neither local, central or remote repository. It may be located somewhere on your local hard disk, for instance in the lib directory of a web app, or somewhere else. The word external thus means external to the Maven repository system, not just external to the project. Most dependencies are external to the project, but few are external to the repository system not located in a repository. The group id and artifact id are both set to the name of the dependency. The name of the API used, that is. The scope element value is set to system. The system path element is set to point to the location of the jar file containing the dependency. The baster points to the directory where the POM is located. The rest of the path is relative from that directory. Snapshot dependencies. Snapshot dependencies are dependencies jar files which are under development. Instead of constantly updating the version numbers to get the latest version, you can depend on a snapshot version of the project. Snapshot versions are always downloaded into your local repository for every build, even if a matching snapshot version is already located in your local repository. Always downloading the snapshot dependencies assures that you always have the latest version in your local repository, for every build. You can tell Maven that your project is a snapshot version simply by appending snapshot to the version number in the beginning of the POM, where you also set the group id and artifact id. Here is a version element example. Maven Repositories. Maven repositories are directories of packaged jar files with extra metadata. The metadata are POM files describing the projects each packaged jar file belongs to, including what external dependencies each packaged jar has. It is this metadata that enables Maven to download dependencies of your dependencies recursively, until the whole tree of dependencies is downloaded and put into your local repository. Maven has three types of repository: local repository, central repository, remote repository. Maven searches these repositories for dependencies in the above sequence. First in the local repository, then in the central repository, and third in remote repositories as specified in the POM. Local repository. A local repository is a directory on the developer's computer. This repository will contain all the dependencies Maven downloads. The same Maven repository is typically used for several different projects. Your own projects can also be built and installed in your local repository, using the mvn install command. That way your other projects can use the packaged jar files of your own projects as external dependencies by specifying them as external dependencies inside their Maven POM files. Central Repository. The Central Maven Repository is a repository provided by the Maven community. By default, Maven looks in this central repository for any dependencies needed but not found in your local repository. Maven then downloads these dependencies into your local repository. You need no special configuration to access the central repository. Remote repository. A remote repository is a repository on a web server from which Maven can download dependencies, just like the central repository. A remote repository can be located anywhere on the internet, or inside a local network. Maven Build Profiles. Maven Build Profiles enable you to build your project using different configurations. Instead of creating two separate POM files, you can just specify a profile with a different build configuration, and build your project with this build profile when needed. You can read the full story about build profiles in the Maven POM reference under Profiles. Here I will give you a quick overview though. A build profile describes what changes should be made to the POM file when executing under that build profile. This could be changing the application's configuration file to use etc. The elements inside the profile element will override the values of the elements with the same name further up in the POM. Frequently asked questions. When should one use Maven? The Maven build tool can be used in the following conditions. When the project has a large number of dependencies. Then, using Maven, you can easily manage those dependencies. When the version of a dependency changes frequently. To update dependencies, simply update the version ID in the POM file. Maven makes it simple to handle continuous builds, integration, and testing. When you need a quick way to generate documentation from source code, this is the tool you use. It helps in compiling source code, and then packaging it into jar or zip files. In Maven, what do you mean by clean, default and site? The three built-in build lifecycles are clean. The clean lifecycle is in charge of project cleaning. Default. The project deployment is handled by the default lifecycle. Site. The creation of the project site documentation is referred to as the site lifecycle. In Maven, what is a snapshot? A snapshot is a specific version of a project that shows the most recent development copy of the project being worked on. Maven always checks out a snapshot of the project in the remote repository for each build. As a result, anytime Maven discovers a newer snapshot of the project, it downloads and replaces the project's older jar file in the local repository. What are the phases of the clean lifecycle? The Maven clean lifecycle takes care of eliminating all temporary files from the output directory, including generated source files, compiled classes, and previous jar files, among other things. Pre-clean performs tasks that are necessary prior to actual project cleaning. Clean delete all files created by the previous build. Post-clean performs tasks that are necessary to finalize project cleaning. What are the phases of the site lifecycle? Everything related to generating documentation for your project is handled by the Maven site lifecycle. Pre-site performs tasks that are necessary prior to actual project site generation. Site develop the project site generation. Post-site performs tasks that are necessary to finalize project site generation, also prepares for site deployment. Site deploy the developed site documentation to the web server of your choice. What are the elements that must be defined for each external dependency? The Maven software relies heavily on external dependencies. It is an intrinsic component of the system without which it is impossible to find dependencies in a system. We will need the following information to specify the external dependency. It necessitates a group ID that is identical to the library name. It necessitates an artifact ID that is identical to the library name. The system's dependency scope must be mentioned. The system path that corresponds to the project position must be mentioned. Thank you for watching this video. We provide hands-on training with labs, homework, group projects. Prepare you for the certification. Provide real projects. Internship opportunities. Support you in Resume LinkedIn. Staffing support. Provide tech references. In-person online class. Class retake options and more. Call us at 847-350-8255 9034 for your free career consultation meeting. Please do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for the latest videos.